You know when you're sat on the beach, just relaxing, enjoying your summer, wondering how many clouds you're going to see in the sky today, and then your phone rings and tells you that you have to go and study Formula One and spend a lot of time thinking about another beach, and that's the beach at Zandvoort and the Dutch Grand Prix. I'm not Yuki Tsunoda, obviously, somewhat taller than he is, but I have been doing exactly the same because Formula One is back and it is really quite exciting. While the entire Formula One paddock has had its brains switched off by regulation, engineers, teams, drivers, whoever it is, they're not allowed into the factory for the summer break. Well, actually, it turns out you can't switch off an engineer's brain. They're working overtime when the drivers and the teams are not doing any work officially. You can be sitting in an armchair like Fernando Alonso in Interlagos, but your brain doesn't disengage. And the results of this can be seen up and down the pit lane in Zandvoort. So let's start with McLaren because it's bright orange and that seems sort of summery somehow, doesn't it? A papaya coloured car. And there's been a lot of attention on the rear wing of the McLaren. They now do have one of those inverting rear wings that Ferrari pioneered in the 2026 season. Red Bull tried out, took away, didn't work properly, and have now reintroduced. Well, McLaren have got their own version, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about what Alex Brundle calls the ripples, the sand dunes on the rear wing end plate, and that's why racing drivers are not engineers. Now, these sections along the outer edge of the end plate are something that we've seen a number of teams experiment with. I think Aston Martin were the first team to really trial a ridged end plate, but this is one of the most extreme examples we've seen, and I say one of the most extreme examples because Alpine have got something quite similar, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. And another thing I want to draw your attention to is another angle of the same part, because you can really see quite clearly those ripples on the end plate here along the edge of the rear wing end plate. And it's actually quite clear to see what they're trying to achieve with it. You can see how these ripples are very much upwashing designs, a little bit of a flat section. And I do wonder, I think it's just about getting a little bit more rear load out of the rear wing, getting the airflow that's coming up from where this man is helpfully pointing to the inner face of the rear wheel and the outer edge of the base of the end plate, just getting that airflow coming up nicely and probably helping assist the downforce generating flows underneath the rear wing doing what they need to do. So a little bit of just a marginal gain there, I think, for McLaren, and that's why teams have experimented with it, but people don't make a very, very big deal of it. Now, it remains to be seen whether McLaren is going to run with this all the way through the weekend. I suspect they probably will, because this being a sprint weekend means there's only 1 hour of free practice, and it's not really where you'd expect to see a large amount of upgrades introduced, particularly on a rear wing. But Monza's next, and we'll see an awful lot there. Staying on the topic of McLaren, of course, they've reshaped some of their rear bodywork and they've adjusted the floor somewhat. You can see some changes around the rear corner of the floor, continuing that trend of experimentation and development by most teams as they try to get back that 2020 style effect of this whole thing that started all the way back in the blown diffuser days, wasn't it? When Red Bull introduced the rear exhaust tailpipe down here and they were trying to get the exhaust gases to flow between the inner edge of the rear wheel and the outer edge of the diffuser, stopping that nasty tyre squirt vortex coming off the base of the rear wheel and into the diffuser. And that cost downforce. Well, the teams are trying to do that in a sort of passive way with this shaping of the rear corner of the floor, and we've seen it before and we'll see an awful lot more of it as the season goes on. Another thing that's a sort of throwback to 2020 a little bit are these notches in the leading edge of the floor, along the edge of the floor here. You can see there's just a little notch here. I think if you're a boat designer, you might call it a chine, but I just think it's a notch. It looks like somebody's done some bad woodworking on the wind tunnel model, except they haven't. It's entirely intentional, probably creating all clever vortexes around the edge of the floor. I asked McLaren, could we see their wind tunnel? Could we see their wind tunnel model? Could we see their CFD model? And I suspect it would be a 2-letter answer, or no answer at all is what the case is. Here is McLaren's rear wing end plate that they ran previously. I meant to show you this before actually, but I'm slightly out of order, but I'm going to show it you. I've been on holiday as well. Everybody's a little bit first day back at school, start of the autumn term, isn't it? Where you're all sort of first day at school if you come up from big school. Arvid Lindblad, he's come up from the big school, hasn't he? And Yuki Tsunoda, he's come back from, I don't know, another school somewhere, the school holiday, suspension, I don't know, he wasn't a naughty boy. Let's have a look here. You can see the ridges that McLaren used to have on its rear wing end plate, very different shape, and the central one missing as well, but still with that upwashing characteristic. But as we go back to the new version, you can see those upwashing elements there on the new variant back to the old variant. And there you can see it again, it was more vertical on that lower section. So I think you're going to see a lot more teams experimenting in this area of the car. And speaking of area of the car where teams are experimenting, let's come around to the back of the McLaren. Yes, I know they've revised their brake cooling ducts, and that happens quite a lot. Cooling levels at the rear of the car are something a lot of teams are trying to play around with, because too much cooling, aerodynamic drag, not enough cooling, fire. So you've got to get that balance right. And McLaren have also been playing around with the exhaust tailpipe bracket. Now, as I've heard talk that these are going to be banned for next season. We'll have to see if the announced ban actually works in reality, because quite often you see things being banned in press releases and even seemingly in the regulations, and then the next season all the teams have them on the car and you have to work out why they're legal. Well, we'll have to wait and see, but these little brackets in the exhaust tailpipes are something that is very much on the FIA's radar at the moment. It's not going to change for this year. Something where we are seeing a lot of development though, I mentioned brake cooling. This is the front end of the Mercedes. Now Mercedes were one of those teams at the start of this season that didn't have conventional brake air scoops on the front wheels of their car. But have a look here, you can just see a small opening appearing behind this leading edge of the front wheel aerodynamic parts that you have to have on the car, and you can just see a little bit of how that air is flowing in as Mercedes have opened this up ever so slightly to get a bit more brake cooling for the low average speed Zandvoort circuit. You will see teams running slightly larger air scoops to get a bit more airflow through the brakes, the brake discs, to keep them cool. But of course, there are significant aerodynamic impacts of those brake cooling ducts. You can actually see on the trailing edge of the Mercedes here, you can see just how they've sculpted that rear brake cooling exit and how it's just feeding into the airflow around the rest of the car. And you'll quite often see teams running flow visualization dye in that area just behind the front wheels to see what those flows are really doing and how they interact with these suspension arms, the arrangement of which is very much an aerodynamic consideration. Some of the mandatory aerodynamic parts around the front wheels are an area of great interest for a lot of the teams, and Mercedes has changed the mounting system for this section right at the base of the wheel. And again, I think it's like those front suspension elements, these link sections, again, all playing a key role in those airflows around the interface of the front wheel, because what the wake off the base of these tyres is doing, and you've got to think, as the car is driving around the track, that tyre sidewall is bulging and changing shape. You've got to model it exactly right, because the bodywork behind it is going to be very, very affected by whatever the tyre is doing. And don't forget, the wheel is turning as well through the corner. So all of this is about managing the wake of the front wheels and understanding that, so particularly how it interacts with the floor, the side pods, and all the way down to the rear of the car. So that's what these parts are trying to do. And you can see the shape of this part as Mercedes is trying to get the air out and out washing away from the critical parts of the leading edge of the floor that sit behind this part of the car. But moving on from Mercedes to an Italian team, not a team with an Italian driver, an Italian team. Ferrari, and that's still the Mercedes on the screen, but let's go and have a look at what Ferrari have changed. And I'm not going to telestrate what's changed here because, well, an Italian man is helping me. Can you see it? Well, let's take a different look from a different angle, because actually what is part of the whole package with Ferrari, they've introduced a new floor this weekend. Now, it doesn't look like a huge difference to the car, but it is actually probably quite significant. When teams introduce new floors, particularly coming up to their home race, it's not a minor change. The floor is an enormous component, and it takes a long time to build each individual floor. So Ferrari changing their floor could be quite significant in the coming races, but as they're learning the balance of the car, there's still a little bit more to come, but it doesn't look very much interesting that I can draw on the screen for you. So let's take a look at the rear end of the car, where there are some interesting elements that I can show you. And coming around to the back of the Ferrari, you can sort of see the area that's been changed around the exhaust tailpipe. This is an area that Ferrari has been experimenting with all season long, and there has been a bit of back and forwards with the FIA over what you can really do in this area. Just to recap, Ferrari's transmission system design and the location of the differential in the transmission casing allowed a slight area of aerodynamic freedom around the exhaust tailpipe, which wasn't available to any team that didn't use the Ferrari transmission. So just Ferrari and Haas, essentially. However, other teams also then discovered, after seeing Ferrari's design, that there was some other freedoms in the regulations in this area of the car that allowed you to classify what were clearly aerodynamic components as exhaust support brackets. But Ferrari's winglet arrangement around the exhaust tailpipe, as you can see, has become a very multi-elemented design. But as you come down to look at other areas on the trailing edge of the diffuser, you can actually see how that stack emerges right from deep down inside the diffuser. With this section here, complete with a little tiny end plate on it, you can see how the suspension elements and different sections there, or the lower beam wing in that case, is sculpted to add to this stack of aerodynamic elements all the way up to that exhaust surrounding element. And you can see how the suspension arms here are all worked and all designed to interact with the airflow around the edge of the rear crash structure, which is this sticky outy bit at the back of the car. And you've also got this hole in the back. In case you're wondering what that is the rear facing TV camera. And in case you're wondering what this little hole is that's got smoke coming out of that, that's the oil system breather that all cars have, but the Ferrari does tend to blow its smoke a bit more than other cars, and certainly with these aerodynamic elements you can see it a bit more. But that's not all. The intricacy of these aerodynamic elements at the rear of the car is amazing. Look here, just on the edge of the transmission casing. So good, I highlighted it multiple times. You can see all of these tiny little shark tooth, like, I don't know if you call them winglets, but aerodynamic elements cast from a small piece of metal just bolted on to the side of the rear face of the transmission casing. The amount of detail on the back of this car is really incredible. And then you've got the little tab elements on the edge of the trailing edge of the diffuser. Again, this is a constant area of revision and design for a number of teams, and I just love looking at these bits of the car. So you don't need to point at them, Mr. Ferrari, because, well, we knew about that in the first place. And so from the Italian legend that is Ferrari to the British legend that is Aston Martin. And the Aston Martin team has a pretty substantial upgrade package on its car. Lots of new aerodynamic parts on the car, but that's not what I'm going to talk about first. Or, in fact, I'm not going to talk about it that much because there's an awful lot going on Adrian Newey's design. But so far, we haven't really been able to assess just how good or otherwise this car is. We know it's been a bit overweight. We know it's struggled for quite a lot of performance all season long, but one of the key factors in that was the Honda power unit in the back of it. You can just see it through the open gills here. And the reason I'm showing you this image, this is from earlier in the season, you can see how open the rear bodywork is. Now take a look at the car out on track around Zandvoort. Yes, it's quite chilly in Zandvoort, and yes, the car had an upgrade package last time out before the summer break, but underneath the bodywork now is a brand new Honda power unit. Honda has refused to say how much extra power it is or how much more competitive they expect to be, but only to say that they do expect to be significantly more competitive, and the power unit they're hoping is going to be significantly more reliable than it has been. This will probably see the Honda powered cars of the Aston Martin team take some penalties in the second half of this season, but they are trading those penalties for increased performance at some of the races to come. And increased power unit performance with Monza, Las Vegas and Mexico City on the schedule could be worth quite a few points for the Aston Martin team. Yes, that's right, I said points, because it does look from initial signs that the Aston Martin package could be worth quite a few points to the green team if that Honda power unit holds together, but the initial signs are pretty good. And staying on the Aston Martin, I just wanted to come around to the back of the car, show you the exhaust tailpipe arrangement, because we didn't get a good look at this last time out. Now, these are parts they introduced as part of their major upgrade package, but have a look here at the link section that has appeared between the two rear wing support pylons, because that's been introduced because of this very high upper wishbone mounting point, and I wonder if it was flexing a little bit there in the original version and they've had to add this bracing element. You can see some thermal contacts just above the exhaust tailpipe, because I do imagine it's getting pretty toasty here, and that's what these stickers are for. These stickers tell you just how hot it's getting. I'm not sure the purpose of the little bit of gaffer tape there underneath the exhaust, though I suspect the exhaust temperature will see that disappear out on track. This was on the car just before the car left the pit lane, so whether it remained there or not, I'm not sure, but I suspect it probably did. So So something we didn't talk about enough last time out was this, the airbox of the Racing Bull. And now this shot was taken at the last race before the summer break, but these additional aerodynamic elements are fitted to the airbox of the Racing Bull this weekend at Zandvoort as well. I was going to telestrate and highlight it in yellow, then I saw a bit of an issue with that, and I'm not going to change the colour. It's bright yellow, you can see it. They've added these little winglets either side of the airbox on the Racing Bull, and the reason the team has been able to do that is that they reshaped. Remember at the start of the season they had this enormous airbox on the top of this car? Well, they've reshaped it to allow the car to have a little bit more space around the airbox. The regulations create a sort of free volume around the outer edge of the car. I'm going to do it in a sort of rough way around the outside. So if you imagine the airbox volume is like this, well, Racing Bulls, having made their airbox a slightly different shape, slightly smaller either side, they freed up this volume here to allow them to have these aerodynamic elements. I don't think you can call them wings because they're very clearly downwashing, but they are interacting, using the centre line of the car to interact with the rear wing. That's pretty obvious. But to see teams exploiting this area around the airbox, I think that's going to have quite a few teams' eyes going, because yes, we've seen horns and little systems like this on various cars coming out in the past, but this is something a bit more comprehensive. And I think if you're Audi, for example, who have again changed their airbox slightly in recent races, they might be thinking, oh, have we missed a trick with this? Could we go down a route like this? It's an interesting design. It looks a bit draggy to me, but maybe on a high downforce track it does have a significant benefit. Anyway, I thought we should mention that because we missed it last time out. Finally, let's get to a French-owned team and look how they get on really nicely. He looks a bit familiar. Anyway, not that one. Let's get to this one. Same team, different rear wing. And that's exactly the story with the Alpine. As part of a massive upgrade package this weekend, Alpine have brought upgrades to one of its two cars. Pierre Gasly's got all of the new bits. Franco Colapinto will have to wait to Monza to get the new parts. I did see a comment from the team saying, and this was quite interesting, the team said, Franco Colapinto will get an identical package of parts to Pierre Gasly based on this upgrade package at Monza. But why would you run a big rear wing like this that you'd run at Zandvoort at Monza? Well, hang on a minute. We've got active aerodynamics now, so the rear wing will be open on all of the straights and closed in all of the corners. The balance of Monza has completely changed. You're not going to see any T-tray-like rear wings like we used to, because you've got the active aerodynamic system overcoming that. So I'm really fascinated to see what we're going to see in a fortnight's time. But we're still in Zandvoort, so I'd better stick on that topic and look at the rear wing end plate of the Alpine. Because you heard about the McLaren version, well, let's have a look at the Alpine version, because Alpine has also got 3 of these ridges on the rear wing end plate. You can just see one here, another one there, and another one down here. Not quite as extreme as the McLaren solution that we started on, but also a very nice, neat design. Not sure if they're sand dunes or ripples on a beach. I'll leave that to Alex Brundle to describe, and I'm sure he'll write something down in the comments about it, because he always does. But I think that's just a nice thing to highlight. And there's a few other nice details on the Alpine. Look at the rear floor here. But what I want to draw your attention to is the tailpipe arrangement on the Alpine. We were talking about those exhaust support brackets earlier on. Well, Alpine have come up with a slightly more complex version on its car. And, well, I think the best way to describe a Formula One car is as a prototype. It's an unfinished product. A Formula One car is never truly finished. You've never finished all of your experiments with it, and you're constantly developing it to make it faster and faster and faster. Well, as you can see here, some of those experiments on the Alpine at least look a little bit unfinished, don't they? You can see some rather un-Formula One-like finishing lines on the trailing edge of some of these bodywork parts. But as I say, it is very much a prototype. Formula One cars are prototypes. In fact, it doesn't even look quite the same side to side there. It could be the angle, but that looks a bit broken on one side. But nonetheless, it does look a bit rough and ready. But that's because the team have put this together as quickly as possible to bring it to the car. See if it's going to work or not when it's out on track, and you'll probably see a much more finished and much more finessed version when they actually get the full upgrade package on both cars at Monza, if we do see these parts at Monza, or if they go for a drag reducing version there, maybe we'll see it in a few races time. But this is the nature of developing prototype parts on a Formula One car, as I say, the car is never truly finished. And that is, for me, one of the most wonderful things about this sport, because you're looking at something that is a work in progress, and it's always that work in progress. And that means it changes all of the time. It's always exciting, and that's why I love this sport. Thanks for watching.